Infections on the health care bill. As the White House pivots and moves over to tax reform later in the summer, what are you going to change at the White House to make sure that he has a pretty good sense of where the votes are on tax reform as that legislative train starts moving through the effect?
The same thing we've been doing, that's continuing to have ongoing, regular, consistent contact with members of Congress. Ideally, some Democrats will want to participate in the process moving forward on a number of issues, including tax reform, and maintaining that open line of communication as the president often does, meeting here with members of both the House and the Senate, as well as having regular calls and also having members of his administration in touch daily with both leadership and members of both houses.
And I already know the debt ceiling vote is coming up later this year. Is there any plan to have the president reach out and make a case personally? And if he does, what is that case to lawmakers up on Capitol Hill on the debt ceiling itself?
Yeah, in terms of actual tactics, I think we'll make those decisions as we get closer to that point. Certainly, I would expect the administration to be engaged in that process throughout. Blake?
Thanks, Sarah. Let me ask you a couple questions about health care. The president said a couple times in his remarks a little while ago that at this point he'll just let, quote, Obamacare fail. Why is it acceptable policy to let Obamacare fail?
I think in large part, look, Democrats have refused to join in fixing the health care problems that have plagued our health care system, specifically in large part due to Obamacare and Obamacare's failures. And that sort of, I think, behavior is simply unacceptable. And hopefully, with the collapse of the program that they put in place, they'll be more willing to come to the table and help clean up the mess.
I want to ask you another comment about the timing going forward. The president said, quote, something will happen and it will be good. It may not be as quick as we had hoped, but it is going to happen. He also started talking about 2018 and the need for more Republicans to get elected. So I guess in the short term, is it realistic for some sort of health care agreement to happen before the August recess even, as the administration and Republicans on Capitol Hill have been hoping, or is this a much longer term horizon now?
Again, as we've said many times before, we're less focused on the timetable and making sure we actually get it right and get it done. We're continuing to focus on repealing and replacing Obamacare with a system that actually works, and those priorities and principles haven't changed.
So is it possible that this is a post-recess, maybe even a 2018 event?
Ideally, I think it happens as soon as possible. But again, we've been clear about not saying by X date, but more about let's get better coverage, let's get a better plan and a better program. That's been our focus, not the timetable. John?
Sarah, three Republican senators, Collins, Murkowski, and Capito, have come out against this idea of repeal. Collins, not surprising, she voted against it in 2015. But Murkowski and Capito both voted for repeal in 2015, and now they're saying they're against it. Is this thing dead before it even leaves the barn?
I think the thing that's dead here is Obamacare. I think we've seen that it's completely failed, and at this point Congress needs to do their job, and they need to do it as quickly as they can, because every day that they don't, we go further into collapsing under Obamacare. And so I think that at this point inaction is not a workable solution, and so they need to come to the table and figure out how to reform the system and fix it.
So what do you say to these two senators, Murkowski and Capito, who voted for repeal in 2015, but now say they won't vote for it in 2017?
I think we say, what the Vice President said today, do your job. It's time for Congress to do their job and do it now.
Speaking to members of the House, Paul Ryan a short time ago said it's pretty difficult to explain to your constituents why you voted for something 2 years ago but aren't voting for it now. Is that the tack that this White House will take as well?
I think that's something that those senators will have to answer to their constituents. That's not something that the White House has to answer on behalf of those members.
Yeah. Will the Trump administration take actions to move Obamacare towards collapse, like stopping CSR payments or other things that have been threatened before?
I don't think that the White House has to take any actions for Obamacare to collapse. I think you see the evidence every single day. You've got dozens and dozens of counties that have no options on the exchange. Premiums continue to skyrocket. I don't think the White House needs to do anything for the failure to continue.
But what about those CSR payments to insurance companies?
don't have anything further than where we've been the last several months on that. Nothing new to update.
Can I ask one more question about the Afghan girls?
Why stop now? We're on such
Yes,
a roll.
the-
Everybody's having a good time.
The Afghan girls robotics team is here competing down the street. Ivanka Trump went there and visited today and met the girls. How does the president find out about some of these individual cases that he's interceded on, like Ayat Hijazi or the Afghan girls team, and sort of what ends up moving him on these individual cases?
I mean, I can't speak to every single way that he finds out about information. Obviously, he has a large staff and an administration that pays close attention to a wide range of issues, and this is something that was flagged and something that he took a great deal of interest in making sure that the problem was solved, and it was, and we're excited that they're here. Matthew.
Thanks, Sarah. Two questions, if I may. First, who's primarily responsible for what appears to be the failure of this healthcare legislation?
I would say Democrats. They're responsible.
Given
Sure.
that they're in the minority.
Absolutely. They're responsible for passing Obamacare. They're responsible for creating the mess that we're in. They're responsible for being unwilling to work with Republicans in any capacity to help fix a system that they know is completely flawed and have publicly said so. I think that it's pretty clear, and I think the responsibility lies on their shoulders.
Great. So then, just a quick follow-up. A bipartisan group of governors, including the Republicans John Kasich, Larry Hogan, Charlie Baker, Brian Sandoval, are calling for a seat at the table in a bipartisan process in healthcare reform. Is the president open to that, specifically sort of starting over with a bipartisan look at this and bringing governors to the table?
The president has met with large number of governors, talk to them regularly. That certainly won't stop at this point in the process, not just on health care, but on a wide variety of issues. In terms of bipartisan, I think the president laid out pretty clearly from the beginning of this process. He was, more than willing to sit down with Democrats. I think they've been the ones that have been completely unwilling to even come to the table to be part of the discussion. Hopefully now that Obamacare continues to completely collapse, maybe they'll decide that they want to part of this process. Steve?
What is the president's level of frustration with Republicans since they control both House of Congress?
I think he's frustrated. He spoke about this earlier today. I think his primary frustration is that there's no progress in terms of over the last 24 hours of moving this further down the road and giving Americans the system that they deserve. But I think he laid out pretty clearly that there's a small number of people that he's probably frustrated with, but I think in large part most of the frustration lies with the Democrats who created the mess but don't want to help fix the problem.
And when he says he's not going to own it, what does he mean by that?
I think he's not going to own the failure of Obamacare. I think exactly what I just said to Matthew. The failure of Obamacare, I think, rests solely on the shoulders of Democrats. They created the program. They pushed it through. They made this legislation happen, and they need to own the failure of it. Jonathan.
Yeah, Sarah, back during the transition at that press conference the president had at Trump Tower, when he was asked about health care, he said that there would be repeal and replace the same week, but probably the same day, could be the same hour. Did this turn out to be a lot more difficult than he anticipated?
Certainly, I think that after hearing members of Congress talk about repealing and replacing Obamacare for 7 years, I think that most people thought that it would probably move a little bit faster.
What did he learn about the way Congress works in this process? What did he learn about this town? What did he learn about the legislative process?
Probably that government always moves slower than it should. Zeke?
Thanks, Sarah. I want to add two statements from the president. One coming up a year ago this
If you
Friday.
can speak up.
Sorry, two statements from the president. One coming up a year ago this Friday at the Republican National Convention as he accepted that party's nomination. He said, "Nobody knows the system better than me, which is why I alone can fix it." So, if the president knew the system so well, does he owe his supporters an apology? That he
For what?
That he
For-
couldn't get health care across the finish line.
For
He
what,
said he could fix it.
having the stock market at an all-time high, creating jobs, putting ISIS on the run, getting rid of countless regulations that have made the business climate better? Should he apologize for that? Absolutely not. We should be very proud of the progress that we've made in the first 6 months and the continued progress that we're going to make over the next 7.5 years.
Second question, another statement regarding your response to Matt. This is from November 8th, 2013 from the President. Leadership, whatever happens, you're responsible. If it doesn't happen, you're responsible. So why is the President trying to shunt responsibility over to Democrats? Doesn't he own any of the blame here?
The blame of a program that was created and forced through before he took office? No. But the process of reforming healthcare is certainly not over, and we're going to continue to focus on reforming the healthcare system and putting one in place that isn't a failure like Obamacare. Hunter?
Thank you, Sarah. This seems like a multi-question day, so I've got two.
I thought they were all multi-question days. I didn't know that there was an option that we could do it different from day to day.
We could also do it on camera, but just an idea.
I'll consider that one too.
Is the failure of this Senate bill going to change the president's approach on this at all going forward? Will we see him take a more public role with rallies and speeches calling for healthcare legislation? And also, how much should we expect to see him meeting with senators about this?
Again, the president has laid out the priorities of what he wants to see in healthcare reform, and now it's Congress's job to legislate. And we're looking to them to work through some of that process, but we're going to continue to be incredibly engaged, specifically on providing technical assistance as well as looking at all options for best repealing and replacing Obamacare.
And the second one thing I've been hearing a lot is this notion that it might have been smarter to pursue infrastructure first, because that had more bipartisan appeal and more likelihood of passage. Do you think there's any regret about not going for another agenda item first?
No, not necessarily. April.
There are a couple questions. One, is the president going to go to the NAACP convention next week in Baltimore?
I'm not sure, April. I'll have to check and get back
Is
to
he
you.
considering?
I honestly don't know. I haven't seen the schedule for next week.
Okay, when it comes to ACA, you're blaming Democrats, but Democrats are saying there were 99 amendments by Republicans in ACA. What do you say to that?
This is still, a Democrat piece of legislation. It was written, it was forced through. Not 99 amendments to how many hundreds of pages of legislation. It's outrageous to make this a bipartisan bill. I think everybody knows exactly who was part of that process, and it certainly wasn't Republicans.
And the last question.
Yes, ma'am.
Some congressional leaders, particularly Democrats, are very concerned about the trust factor when it comes to Jared Kushner and his security clearance, and also still remaining in the job. What does the president have to say about his son-in-law right now in the midst of this storm, with the fact that more information continues to come out after he gave his initial statements, and they're concerned about the trust factor when he has a critical piece of security clearance that deals with issues of trust? Is the president considering allowing him to stay or leave? And should he keep his security clearance?
I don't know of any changes that would be made. The president has confidence in Jared, and I'm not aware of any changes at all.
Sarah, is it fair to say the president was blindsided last night? Can you walk us through it all, when he found out, when senior staff found out, how this unfolded?
I'm not going to get into the process piece and the tick-tock and the back and forth. Again, as we've said a dozen times, our focus is on the repeal and the replace, not the process piece of it, but making sure that we get this done.
Also, Sarah, one more. Can you confirm the president did tell lawmakers again last night that they would look like dopes if they did not go for this repeal and replace?
I'm not sure. I'll have to check and get back to you.
Thanks, Sarah. I want to ask you about the president's pledge to get more Republicans elected in 2018. He said earlier today that he's going to be working very hard to make that happen. Does that go for two Republican incumbent senators, Jeff Flake and Dean Heller, who are not on board with this healthcare plan?
Due to legal restrictions, I'm not going to get into any potential election questions. John Gizzi.
Yeah. Thank you, Sarah. Two questions, please.
John Roberts is bored today. He's headed out.
John, stick around.
Oh.
question. Even before Senator McConnell's statement last night and Speaker Ryan's press conference, the concept of an outright repeal was cause du jour in the House of Representatives at least. There was a meeting of conservative lawmakers on Thursday who are adamant about it. Congressman Biggs has since introduced the bill for a direct repeal. Is there any possibility the administration would at least sit down and join the cause for a direct repeal before it pursued any new kind of legislation?
I think we're certainly open to having conversations on all fronts and the best way to move this process forward.
All right, my
Dave,
second question.
Sorry,
Yeah.
number 2.
One of the things, it's been concluded that the meeting that Ms. Veselnitskaya had with Donald Trump Jr. was about eventually lifting all of the Magnitsky sanctions, which targeted top officials in the Kremlin. Now, since January, Secretary Tillerson has said none of the sanctions will be listed. Many of the Russian expatriates and opponents of the Kremlin regime have suggested that if the president could put this issue behind him by supporting further Magnitsky sanctions. Are there any plans to do that?
Specific sanctions, I can't speak to that today, but once we have an announcement, I'll certainly let you know. Dave.
Sarah, thanks. The president has said many times in the past 6 months that we needed to get the healthcare legislation done first so we could go on to massive tax reform to help the economy. Can you now proceed with massive tax reform that will give the biggest bang to the economy without having done the Obamacare part of it?
We're going to continue pushing forward on tax reform and laying out that plan. I know this will surprise a lot of people, but we can walk and chew gum at the same time. We're not done with the healthcare battle. We're going to continue pushing forward on that and hopefully get that completed and then transition fully to tax reform after that's over. Kristen?
Sarah, thank you. You continue to say this is Democrats' fault. The reality is they were willing to sit down at the table with you guys and negotiate to try to improve.
I missed all of those phone
Obamacare.
calls coming
They
in.
but they said they weren't going to work with you guys on repeal and replace. So isn't it fair to say that you guys were dug in and wouldn't find common ground with them as well?
Not at all. We've been very clear from the beginning. We're willing to sit down with Democrats and talk about how to reform the healthcare system. And until they recognize the fact, I think that Obamacare has completely collapsed and failed, I think it will be hard for them to move forward in the process.
In
But their
2012
unwillingness is pretty well documented.
In 2012, at Real Donald Trump's Twitter account tweeted, Obama's complaints about Republicans stopping his agenda, and I'm quoting, are BS. Since he had full control for 2 years, he could never take responsibility. Doesn't the president need to take some responsibility for this moment, Sarah?
Look, I think we're taking responsibility in terms of pushing new legislation through, but not the failures of legislation that happened before the president got into office. I think you also have to take into account the outrageous obstruction that we've talked about pretty frequently up here, not just on healthcare, but across the board, and just allowing the president's administration to be fully staffed and be able to fully carry out the duties of the office.
And I understand what you're saying, but this moment is not about the legislation that was passed before the president took office. This moment is about the president and Republicans who campaigned on a promise to repeal and replace Obamacare for 7 years, the president for the time that he was on the campaign trail, not living up to that promise to the American voters. Doesn't he need to take responsibility?
Oh, like I said before, the debate and the battle over health care isn't over. We're continuing to push forward to repeal and replace Obamacare, and we're going to continue fighting for that every single day. So you're speaking as if this is over and done, and it certainly isn't. Charlie?
I was just curious whether the president would be willing to sign a repeal-only legislation if that ended up on his desk.
I don't have any announcement to make on specifics. That hasn't hit his desk, but I think right now we're certainly open to considering all options to reform health care and make sure that Americans get the best care possible. Alex?
So the president earlier today had a luncheon with service members. He said he wanted to hear ideas from them about the war in Afghanistan. Can you tell us about any of these ideas that he heard? Also, he clearly is not happy about how long the U.S. is there in Afghanistan. would he reject the plan from Mattis that would keep the U.S. there long term?
In terms of specifics that were discussed at the meeting, I'll see if I can get any of those ideas, if that's something that those individuals want to share. But the president felt like it was important to talk directly to some of the servicemen that have been on the ground and hear some of their feedback and some of their thoughts about what's taking place there and some of the progress being made.
In regards to if Mattis came forward with a plan that kept the U.S. there long term, Trump has been complaining, President Trump's been complaining that the U.S. has been there for 17 years. Would he be supportive of a plan that kept the U.S. there longer?
The president's still reviewing what options he wants to take and what decisions he'll make, and we'll keep you guys posted when we have an announcement on it. John Decker.
Thanks a lot, Sarah. Repealing and replacing the Affordable Care Act was perhaps the biggest campaign promise that the president made when he was president. Does the president believe, does he fear that failing to do so will impact the Republicans' ability to hold on to the House and the Senate in 2018? Is this something that he's conveyed to members of Congress in his conversations with them?
I still, again, we're going to get the job done. We're still focused on doing what we set out to do. But I would also argue that the president laid out a lot of priorities during the campaign, creating jobs, creating a better job environment, getting rid of burdensome regulations, putting ISIS on the run, securing the border, protecting our country, taking steps every single day to help improve the lives of the forgotten man. And I think he certainly delivered on a lot of those things. And we're going to continue to do that every single day that he's in office.
And then, Sarah, also, in terms of what the president said a little bit earlier and also what he tweeted earlier, he spoke about coming together. Does that indicate that the president is open to some sort of bipartisan solution to fixing what is wrong with the Affordable Care Act?
Absolutely. The president said all along that his primary goal is to find a solution. He's happy to work with Democrats to get that done. Francesca.
Thank you, Sarah. You said that the administration would want Congress to finish work on health care and then it would move on to taxes. Previously, the White House had said that it wanted to see a draft plan for that tax reform before the August recess. Is that still the case, and do you still expect to get tax reform done this year in light of what we learned about the health care bill yesterday?
We're still very focused on moving forward on tax reform. It's still a big priority for the administration, and that certainly has not changed.
In terms of getting it done before the end of the year?
We want to get the biggest tax reform as possible, tax reform plan in place, and we'll, keep you guys posted on the timeline and announcements for that happening.
One other topic, since it's multiple question day, I wanted to ask about the legal fees. Is the president paying for his lawyers that are defending him in the Russia case, or in the Russia allegations that are outside of this White House? And is the president paying Mark Corallo, the spokesman for the Mark Hazowitz and Jay Sekulow and the lawyers on his team?
I'm not sure what the structure is for that.
Thank you, Sarah. Sarah,
sorry.
didn't the president, though, himself, as a candidate and as president, raise significant expectations about this legislation, saying it was going to be a beautiful plan, everyone was going to be covered? And did he ever really have a plan? And what does that say about his true knowledge regarding the healthcare system?
I think the president has shown he has extensive knowledge. He's laid out the priorities that are important for him to be included in the legislation. And once again, this is not a game over situation. We're continuing to push forward every single day and work hard to make sure that the American people get the type of health care that they need and deserve. Alexis?
Can I just clarify, as long as the Affordable Care Act remains law and the replacement legislation is in abeyance, is the president committing through HHS to support the subsidies, the executive sustenance that the existing law requires?
As has been the case since we got here, we'll continue to keep you posted as decisions and changes are made, or if they're not.
And can I follow up? You just said a few minutes ago, we are taking responsibility in terms of pushing new legislation through. That sentence seemed to conflict with what you were saying earlier. Can you clarify what you mean by we're taking responsibility what happened last night is the president's responsibility. That's what you're saying?
I'm saying that our goal is to continue to push to repeal and replace Obamacare. We're committed to doing that. That hasn't changed throughout the campaign. That was something we talked about and something we talk about every single day that we're here. We're focused on doing that, and we're going to continue pushing forward. That's it.
Sarah?
Abby?
So, outside of the White House a couple of weeks ago, Mitch McConnell said either Republicans will agree to change the status quo or the markets will continue to collapse, and we'll have to sit down with Senator Schumer. So he was suggesting that sitting down with Democrats would be a consequence of Republicans failing to repeal and replace Obamacare. Is McConnell and the president, are they on the same page about whether or not they really do want to work with Democrats on this? McConnell seemed to indicate that that was the plan B, not plan A.
The president has said all along that he's happy and willing to work with Democrats on repealing and replacing Obamacare.
Do you guys believe that that's the way the process has actually unfolded in the Senate?
In terms of Democrats being unwilling to come to the table, yes.
In terms of whether the Senate Republican leaders have been open to Democrats?
I think Democrats laid out very clearly from the very beginning of this process they were unwilling to come to the table and have that conversation.
Sarah, I want to ask you about the Iran deal. It's been reported that the president was reluctant to certify that Iran is in compliance. Can you give voice to that reluctance? Just how reluctant was he?
I think, as everybody in the room knows, the president has talked about this pretty extensively, and his opinions and his feelings on this deal have certainly not changed. He still very much thinks it's a really bad deal, and that the Iranians have not been fully compliant. And we're going to continue through this process. And I refer you back to his statement to see where he lays that out pretty clearly.
One more question to follow up on the lunch today. He sat with enlisted men and he heard from them what they think should happen. Was the president seeking a second opinion from what he's hearing from the commanders? Or I'm just curious why he wanted to hear from the enlisted men.
I wouldn't call it a second opinion. I think it's important for him to have that type of engagement. I know that's something that matters to him, not just on specific policy issues, but just to be able to have that type of open dialogue with the guys that have the boots on the ground. And he'll want to be able to continue to do that throughout, his time in office.
Sarah, both you and the president have suggested that Obamacare is simply dead. In fact, though, there are millions of people who still depend on it, and the president has decisions to make, as was noted earlier, the payments to insurance companies and subsidies. He can push this over the cliff, as Senator Schumer said a short time ago. He has the power to do that. It's not simply going to fail on its own. He has the power to do it.
I disagree with you. I think we're seeing it fail day after day after day as millions of people...
Well, if it's already failed, it can't fail day after day after day. You're saying it's dead. You're saying it's dead. It's not dead. There are still millions of people, many of them the forgotten men and women you like to talk about, who still depend on it. And he has the power to kill it dead. He has the power to push it over the cliff. Are you saying he's already made the decisions on subsidies and payments to insurance companies that would finally kill it?
No, that's not what I'm saying. Again, in terms of Obamacare being dead, it's an unsustainable program. When something is unsustainable and it can't be revived...
You're not saying it's dead.
There
are people who depend on it. Millions of people. Many of them your supporters.
Right,
his supporters.
And
How could it be dead?
that's why the process of repealing and replacing would need to make sure that those people are continued coverage, and that's been a big focus and one of the priorities of this process throughout from the beginning.
Is he going to help push it over the cliff?
Again, I think this is already going over the cliff and doesn't need a push by the president.
When you've spoken to the president earlier today, said that this system will continue to collapse and will get to a point where Democrats have to come back to the table and join in trying to find a way to fix it. What specifically does the administration think would be that point where we would get a group conversation that has not happened yet?
I think that's a question, frankly, you'd have to ask the Democrats. I think they're the only ones that know what's going to bring them to the table.
You're the ones who keep saying that there's going to arrive a point at which the system has failed to such a degree that suddenly there's a willingness to compromise. So, what are you envisioning?
Well, I can't imagine that. I can't imagine that as this program, as he laid out, goes deeper and deeper off the cliff.
You're off the
that-
cliff or not off the cliff. You don't go deeper and deeper off a cliff.
What is the point that you're describing?
The point is Obamacare is simply unsustainable. We've said this 100 times.
But you're saying
it's
you're
not a
gonna revive
program
it.
that can be revived. It is essentially a dead program in terms of being able to provide the type of health care that Americans need and deserve. And our point is the priorities that the president has laid out. We have to have a plan in place that actually provides care, not just coverage, that brings the costs down, lower deductibles, across the board reform. And at this point, hopefully Democrats will see how bad the system is and come to the table.
What specifically is going to happen to bring them back to the table? Other than, I mean, you're saying it's unsustainable, it can't be supported.
I would
and the
think that
president
those
is saying it's
things
going to get to a
alone
point where
should
Chuck
wake
Schumer
up
knocks on the door.
Democrats and make them want to come to the table. Again, I'm not going to speak for the breaking point of Democrats, but I can't imagine that as we continue down this road, they don't come to the table to try to help save health care in this country.
Sarah, you spoke before about the question about Syria. You spoke before about progress made in tackling ISIS. And U.S. backed forces have taken a couple more neighborhoods in western Raqqa recently. I was wondering, does the president have an opinion on who should control the city after ISIS is expelled?
I haven't had that conversation, but I would certainly refer you to members of the national security team, and they might be able